Welcome everybody. So let's have a quick discussion about trade-offs. So when we're creating code, sometimes we're always facing trade-offs. Like we want the benefits of one thing, but we kind of don't want to give up something else that we get with the trade-off. So occasionally, what we will do is we will create classes that do certain things for us, but maybe we'll add utilities to that class that will help us do other things, perhaps. So let me transition to my notebook really fast. So it may sound a little bit vague about what I'm talking about. In this specific case, we're talking about class builders and also some class utilities. But the primary focus is going to be like class builder. How I'm going to maybe create a class builder and then maybe upgrade that to or implement that with some extra features and then put that into my class to help out. Okay, so let me just basically give a review. Remember that we had a discussion about records. Records in Java are essentially a special class that just requires to essentially declare the variables, and then it will build out an entire it'll build out an entire kind of data encapsulation class where the data is immutable. So if you remember, we basically just had like the class name, and then we defined the variables like string, and then we said first name, whatever, and then we added all these things. So we essentially just declared what the variables were, and then it would automatically create the constructor where every one of the string variables or every one of the class variables was put as a constructor parameter. So the first one would be string first name. Sorry to be so maybe terrible with my writing. And then all of a sudden it would just create it would automatically create the getters too. And then we had a method where it's basically uh, public string, and then it would have first name, and then return this dot first name. So a little bit of this is just kind of like very brutally overly simplified, but that's what records did for us. And why did we like the records so much is because it essentially expanded everything that we need just by declaring the maybe declaring the variables, right? And then we could add extra things to it. If you remember, we added maybe the two string thing to it. So that way, whenever we asked it to print the class, it would essentially so whenever we asked it to print the class, it would expand out all the information from all the variables, and we defined how we wanted that to look, and then we had something really nice, neat, tidy, and everything else, all kind of encapsulated into one class. Now, what was the trade-off? The trade-off was is that everything that we provided had to go into this constructor. So you had this constructor. If these record classes get very big, the constructor effectively would have, this opening and closing set of parameters where you'd have all these things that you had to keep track of. Now, fortunately, IntelliJ kind of lays out hints for that, but still it can be quite a bit of a pain. So what if so whenever you're creating a record class, you have to be mindful that on just by itself, if you want to use it, something has to populate that constructor when it's being called with all the variables there at one time, and then you've got it set. But my goodness, I mean that actually could be quite a bit of effort. Now, what if you actually did want to have setters involved, but you wanted to have kind of everything with it. You wanted the private variables, you wanted the getters and all that, but you also wanted to have some setters as well. And it ended up being like you don't quite get that because once you set it, the variable is static or is final and you can't change it. So you don't want your setters to like be able to. You don't want to be able to update the values, but you don't want to set them all at one time either. Like maybe what you'd like to do is you'd like to just initialize the constructor, and then you would set the first name, then you'd set the last name, then you'd set whatever else that's coming through here, and you would do those incrementally. And maybe you would just grab that as user input, maybe from the command line or something. Who knows? So if you create setters, you can make your variables private, but setters means that you're setting them after the class gets initialized. And so you can't do that by having the final. Then you'd have to implement all these checks to say if this has been set, then prevent them from doing it. Then every one of your setters has this kind of extra if then condition and all that. Well, it turns out that there's kind of a technique called a class builder technique where we can add a lot of features to these classes that make it look like we've created some utilities for the classes that are going to be super helpful, right? So let me give you a demonstration on how this could work. And really, the sky's the limit. And this is just really one of very simple implementations. But I want to show you just how much we can expand out any class. And in this case, we're going to use a record class. And we're going to expand it out to where we can kind of have the cake and eat it too, essentially. And really without a whole lot of effort. Now, in this video, there may be a chance that occasionally I will like pause the video so that way you don't have to watch me sit there and type every single thing out if it's going to be like really redundant. But I may not do that, so I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes whenever we're typing it out. So let's look at an actual class builder scenario where we can use our record class just like we used to, but we want to be able to set the variables maybe one at a time, and then we can expand that class builder even further than that. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to transition over to my IntelliJ screen. Pull it up here. And what I have is essentially kind of maybe something already pre-built that will help us out quite a bit. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to show you what my structure is. I've essentially created one record. Let me close this just for the time being. So we have a record class called driver record. Let's imagine that this is the DMV, right? Whenever we go to the DMV, we know what a hassle is to fill out every piece of paperwork that they could possibly have. So let's imagine that somebody shows up at the DMV and they're going to create a driver record, and we're going to have to, while they're sitting there asking you information, you want to be able to like whatever. So imagine that you walk up to the teller's desk and they have a Java application that's running on the command line. Now this is, again, very oversimplified. What they might have to do is maybe they'd have to pull up an entire constructor or whatever, or type all in your information, and then construct the class at one time, because that's how records work, right? Now, again, this is not even something they would do. This don't even really make sense, really. But whenever we have this record, all of these things are labeled as final, which means they must be passed into the constructor so that way they actually get a meaningful value. Because after the constructor initializes the class, all of these will either be the value set by the constructor or they will take on a null value. But in this case, since it's a record class, the constructor requires each one of these things to have a parameter whenever you call it. Now, if you look, that's going to be really super cumbersome. And again, what I've got down here is a toString method that will actually print out when we ask it to print the information. But this is our record class. Now let's see how we can use this just on kind of like without any kind of utility classes or anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this back. I've opened up my main class. I'm going to open this up to the right just so it will help. Maybe IntelliJ will help me out a little bit. Maybe just a little bit. Let me pause for 1 second. Okay, I was getting a little bit, sorry about that. I was getting a little error here at the bottom of my screen. So I'm going to pull this up. Most of you guys are aware that you can split the screens on IntelliJ just like you can in VS Code. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, driver record. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say driver 1. Okay. And now we're going to essentially initialize this class. So driver 1 is going to be equal to new. And then we're going to put driver record. And now we got to go through this big long task of doing what? Calling the constructor. So the first one is going to be Nathan. There we go. The second one is going to be the last name, which is Russell. Then we're going to have to do the date of month, which I'm going to say is March. Then we're going to have the date, which is 20. That's not my actual birthday. Then the year is going to be, I don't know, 1990. That is also not accurate. And now we're going to have the license ID. Let's put that as R11 sorry, we need to put this in double quotes. R11-234-567. There we go. Now the next one, what do we got next? Goodness, we're going to have the address. So I'm going to put 100 Big Red Bird Way. Gosh. All right, now we're going to go on. And now I'm going to do the city. So I'm going to say, let's say Louisville. And then KY. And then, goodness, what's next? We're going to have the country, which is USA. Then the next one is going to be my height in feet, which is 6 foot. And this is true, I think. And then 0 inches, also true, I think. And then the license expiration month, let's say it's going to end in April 20th, 1 month after my birthday. And then maybe we're going to make this 2025. Okay, whatever. Now we're going to have to say, is this an active driver's license? We're going to put the word true there. And then we're going to say, is this person an organ donor? Yes, why not? And so now we've got it. So we've effectively created this driver record. Now, back in the day when we did not have IntelliJ providing these kind of hints, right? These kind of hints here. Let's be clear at how troublesome this would be. So I'm going to say disable the hints for this. And we'll go ahead and say, who knows? We'll put this here. Now, you see how cumbersome that looks? Doesn't that look absolutely terrible? Because that's what we'd have to type in. And IntelliJ would not be providing these hints anymore, and we just have to type these out. Or what's worse is maybe back in the day, we were like making this one line and hopping down. And so, quite frankly, all of that looks kind of terrible, to be quite honest. Okay, not a big deal. So if we had even a bigger record where maybe there was 40 or 50 entries in this one record because it's coming from a database, we'd probably find a way to cutely kind of put all this together and then wrap it in there. Or maybe we'd appeal to a builder class inside of driver record. So what's the benefit of driver record again? All these variables over here are marked as private. I'm sorry, as final. Private and final. Which means you can't access them directly. And once they're set, which means they have to be set by the constructor, there's no updating them. So there's no point in creating setters because it won't work and it won't even compile, because why would you be creating a setter for something final? That must be an error, so the compiler would probably throw up an error on that. So how can we get around that? I would like to be able to set these individually, but I don't, to avoid this gigantic one big long constructor of maybe 40 or 50 arguments, I could appeal to something called a class builder, a class builder pattern or a class builder subclass inside of my driver record class. Just to be clear, let me show you that this does work. So we're going to have system.out.println, and I'm going to say put driver 1 in there. I'll run this just to make sure that we're in good shape, at least for the moment. And you see here that when we scoot this up somehow, that this is actually behaving in a way that makes sense. You got the first name, last name, date of birth, license ID, all these things seem to be working. Okay, great. All right, by the way, notice the toString. It doesn't print true or false. It's got this ternary operator. So what I like to do is I sometimes like to litter code with like extras. So if you're curious how the ternary operator works inside of Java, it's very much like any other language. You basically have the condition check, then a question mark, and then you got for the true, then you got for the false. So instead of printing out true or false, we have yes or no based on whether or not it's true or false. So you guys see that. So now what I want to do is I want to update this. I'm going to close main Java, and I want to update this so that way I could have a builder class inside of here. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually say create a subclass. So you can actually have subclasses inside of this. Now let's see what we got. We're going to say public static, okay, public static, and I'm going to call it a class as well, class, and we're going to call it builder, open close parentheses. Sorry, actually we don't need that. I'm sorry, we want that. And then we're going to open that up and we're all set. So now we've created essentially a subclass, and I believe if we look at maybe driver, no it doesn't. Sorry, I'm wrong on that. So we're going to have this public class, we're going to have this public static class called builder. Static just means that it could be used without the class being initialized. So just kind of similar to maybe other things that you might have experience with. Whenever we declare something static inside of a class, that means it can be used without using any information from an initialized class. All right, which means that we could use it straight away without actually creating an instance of it, or using a constructor to create an instance of it. So what I want to do is, this is going to be a little bit fun. You're almost going to wonder why we're doing this, and to some extent maybe it is a little bit of a pain perhaps. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to copy all of these things, and I'm going to make these variables down here as well. So I'm going to paste these. Now in each one of these I'm going to mark them private. So just to be kind of here. You may say, why am I doing this when I've already got them up here? Well, we're creating utility for the builder class. We're just basically creating utility that's going to help us out. And bear with me, and hopefully I can get around to the point where I can show you what's happening. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to see if I can use some advanced IntelliJ stuff here. So these don't need to be commas. These needs to be something else. I'm going to essentially go right here, do control find, and I'm going to say, all right, we're going to do comma. Actually, I think it's file edit. Bear with me just for a second. So find, replace. Oh, it's R, not F. So I'm going to say look for the comma, and I want to replace it with a semicolon. And as you guys see right here, if I wanted to, I could just basically select everything, but notice it's right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say replace, replace, replace. As I go down through there, you basically can see that I'm replacing all those. So I don't want to replace anything else. That's just basically where I want to go. So now I've got private, string, all these things. Maybe I don't have my spaces looked out, but we'll leave that alone. Okay, so that's just kind of a, it's bad coding practice to do that. In fact, let me just fix it. There are companies that have linting rules that enforce certain things, so we don't want to be like clumsy about this. So now I've created this subclass where I've effectively created all of these parameters that were identical to what was above. Now what I'm going to do inside this class is I'm going to define setters for this subclass effectively. I'm just going to define setters for this subclass. So first I'm going to create a constructor where there's basically nothing going to be happening with it. Let's just put it there. Now, for each one of these things, I'm going to say we're going to be returning back a builder. So I'm going to say public, and I'm going to say builder, because it's going to be returning back the builder subclass. Is going to be returning back an instance of itself. And I'm going to say first name, and I'm going to put string first name. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot first name equals first name. Okay. Now I'm going to return this. Now at first that looks a little bit awkward, doesn't it? What does it mean to return this? So let's be clear. Maybe let me shrink a few things down here. Let me get rid of some of this stuff that I've got here. We are inside of a record class. Inside of this record class, I have defined a subclass called builder. This is what's going to be our builder class. So for each one of the variables that I had up here, I'm defining it in my builder class. And in my builder class, I'm effectively, I've got a constructor that does absolutely nothing. I'm going to say public, and this method is actually going to return the builder class. So what we're going to do is when we say this, it's returning itself. So what's going to happen is we're going to initialize a builder class, and each time that we set one of the parameters, it's going to update it and return it, so that way in the main method we could keep updating those, and it's going to keep returning itself until we get done. And then we're going to call something called build. Okay, and then I'll show what's going to do there. So effectively what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to go through each and every one of these, and I'm going to have to say public, builder, and I'm going to say maybe last name, and then I'm going to put string last name. And you can kind of see that this is almost just going to be trivial for almost all of these things. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to return this. Okay. So I don't want you to sit here and watch me type every single one of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to kind of expand all this out. I'm going to type it up, and then I'll be right back. Is that okay? So give me one moment while I do that. I'm going to pause the video, and then you guys will see me hop right. Okay. So I went through and created all those just like we had before, where you basically did a setter, not for the record class, but for its sub builder class. Okay, so we're here in the class builder. Notice that all these things are this, where it's basically you set these, but you never access them or you're not using them effectively. So we're in the class builder subclass of driver record. The constructor does absolutely nothing. We just put it there to make it look intentional. So now what we're going to do is we're going to declare a method for each one of these that's going to return back the same builder class that I'm updating as we go along. So when we call first name as a setter for the builder class, it's going to set the first name of that builder class and then return it. So that way then I could call last name. Okay. So we're essentially setting all these values here, and you see that I've done this for each and every one of those variables that we had. Not a big deal, right? So at the end of it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. So remember, the builder class right now has a bunch of private variables that I created setters for. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to create the method called build. So I'm going to have public, and what build is going to return is it's going to return back a driver record, just like we defined up there. So it's going to be driver record, and I'm going to name this build. It's very common for class builders to have this method called build. And then effectively what we're going to do is we're going to return a new instance of driver record, where we're going to take all the variables that we set inside of the builder class and we are going to essentially make them in the constructor. And why this is really cool is because we can essentially just say first name, last name, and this is going to be essentially everything that we had up here, right? It's going to be all of these things here, where I'm going to go down this list. So again, I'm basically going to retype all these, only without the string or the declaring what they are, down in here inside this build method. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video and finish typing all these out. So give me 1 second. Okay, I'm back. And if you look and see what I did on this build method, what it's going to do is it's going to create an instance of driver record. Remember, what does driver record require? That every single one of the items in the record has to be passed into the constructor. And then we're going to return that as what gets returned from the build method of our class builder. So what this is going to allow us to do is we're going to be able to keep that class record as we had before, so everybody can use it just as they have. But it's also provided a way for people that want to sequentially build it to utilize it effectively, right? That's essentially what we're doing. Everybody that wants to utilize this kind of step-by-step process of assigning values can now do it, correct? Okay, so let's see how we can use this. Let's go over here to our main method right here. Double click this. So now this is what we have whenever we were effectively using the driver record constructor directly. We had to put every one of these things in there. All that's fine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to say, remember that's static, so we don't have to actually declare usage of it. And we're going to essentially start the class builder. All right. So let's do that. We're going to say we're going to use that class. Remember, it's driver record, but we're going to use the builder and this is going to be new driver record builder. Okay, so we've declared an instance of the builder class, right? We're going to use the instance of the builder class. And actually so I'm actually going to leave it like this, and then I will show you guys how we can actually kind of make this a one-liner here in a minute, but let me just show you how we're going to do this. So at this point, we're going to have dr builder dot. Notice how now I can do the first name, and I could set the name to, I don't know, John, and then the dr builder Sorry about that, guys. I hit the I hit the pause button by accident. Sorry about that. So I've got like a little. I'm kind of somewhat new to the streaming environment. I try to kind of take my teaching mechanisms here to the new level. I brought one of these little stream decks, and I'm still trying to learn all the buttons on it. So I apologize for that. Actually, I don't want to take the same approach that I was about to take. I want to actually maybe just show you how we can make it all in one line, so that way we can demonstrate what all this things are returning. Let's see if we can figure out what is happening here. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to have up here. I had driver record 1. I'm going to create a new one here that says driver record. I don't know, driver 2. Okay, so we've declared that. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to essentially use that builder pattern to show you that I can actually walk this step by step and still create a driver record where the entries are still immutable, right? So I'm going to say driver 2, and then I'm going to allocate this to be a new instance of driver record and then builder. Whoops, sorry about that. Builder. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop down here and I'm going to say plus, let's see what we got. We're going to say plus dot, not plus, what am I doing? Dot, set the first name, and I'm going to put, I don't know what name was I using up here. I was using my own name, so we'll call this John. Okay, and then I'm going to do dot last name, Smith. Okay, jump down here again. I'm going to do dot, what was the next one? Date of birth month, and I'm going to put maybe 3 here. And so as you guys can see, it's effectively like, let me show you here what this is looking at. It's effectively like we got this chain of things building out here where we got dot and then last name, right? It's effectively essentially that we're doing that all the way through. As you can see, if I hit the semicolon here, we're all set. Except it's going to keep complaining about something until I do the dot build. And then at that point, you'll see that it stops. It stops the complaining. Because why is that? Whenever we initialize this kind of driver record dot builder class, it's basically returning this. Which this, when it's returning this over here, to be clear, whenever we're returning this is always going to be that class builder. For each one of these things is returning this, where we have this dot something, it's returning this, but this is a builder class, which is a subclass of driver record. But what have we declared this as? We've declared driver 2 to be a driver record. So all of these keep returning back a builder class to where it updates it, but then returns back the class where it's updated. And then finally, when we get done with everything, we then do build, which if we look over here at build, going all the way down at the bottom, build is where we actually call the driver record constructor to return a driver record. So that's why we got to maybe keep fooling around with these red lines until we do the dot build. So we're going to maybe separate these things so that way it's nicer, cleaner, dot, and then we'll keep this dot build all the way through. So we're going to do maybe dot DOB, and then we'll do the day, and maybe I'll put, I don't know, the 29th, and then we'll do .dob for the year, and then we'll say that maybe this person was born in, I don't know, 1995, who knows. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk through setting each and every single one of these things until I do all of them, and then finally build gets called to return back everything. So when this builder class is happening, we're setting John, returning back a builder class. Setting last name, returning back a builder class. Date of birth, month, setting back a builder class. Doing this, returning back a builder class. Returning back a builder class. With each one of these things that we're setting, we keep returning back a builder class until we do build, which then essentially takes all the things that we have set, passes them into the driver record constructor, and then returns it from the builder class, passes it right on up to the outer part here to driver 2 outside of right here on this line, outside of all these dots, right? Okay, so just to be clear, whenever we're creating this builder class, we essentially defined all of the variables that would be in the proper class, the super class, I guess we could say, is we've got all the variables that would be in the other one, except that we're setting those individually because those are private, and we can also keep setting those until we call builder, and then it's over, okay? So we're setting first name, and then when we set the first name, we're turning back that same builder class that we're using to build the thing. So we're updating the values, sending them back. Update the value, send it back. So at each one of these iterations, you're getting this class starting here had nothing initialized. Then it came here and updated the first name to be John inside of the builder class, and then it returns a class. Then it went down here and it updated this one, and then 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 finally we have it completed. So I think, let's see if we can, if we were to expand this out, it would essentially be like just returning the class. So I could say maybe driver record dot builder to declare it, and then I'm going to say temporary thing to hold it's basically temporary because it is temporary, and then that would be effectively what? Driver record dot builder, and then the constructor would be empty, and then there we have it, right? Sorry, I got to have the word new here because we're creating a new instance of it. And then we have it. And so what we would do is we could say temp is equal to temp dot first name, and then I'd put maybe Jason. Okay, and then I would put temp is equal to temp dot last name is equal to, I don't know, Smith or Smith. And you can see I could keep hopping down at each one of these because what's happening, the temp class is the one I got. Each time that we use one of these methods, we've created the builder class and it's returning this as though it's returning that same class. So if you look at the way I've got it here kind of broken up, is temp gets reassigned to be temp, but we've updated the Jason. The same temp gets updated with Smith. So at this point, the first name and last name have been updated for this value right here. So instead of having to break all that out, we have all these assignments and reassignments. It's effectively the same thing as if we do this chain of dots all through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video one more time, and I'm going to expand all this out, and I'm going to show you that this builder class is actually quite helpful, right? So give me a second. All right, so I've got all these laid out here. There's another benefit that I want to show you. So I basically created all these, and now look, I've changed a few things. Now we got John Smith, birthday's March the 29th, 1995. So you see I changed almost a few things here. Now what I'm going to do is, now that we've built that, now that we got the driver 2 built up, I'm going to show you that this works. So I'm going to do system.out.print ln, and I'm going to put driver 2 in there, and then I'm going to hit play. So if you look, you see that we have created that entire bit of information. Not a big deal, right? All right, one of the other benefits of this, I had to flip over here and look at a notification I had. So when we look at the benefit of this is, notice, remember how we had the constructor where we could not rearrange these things, because if I rearrange these two, my first name would become Russell, my last name would become Nathan. Look at what happens when we do this. Absolutely nothing is hurt whenever we go out of order with this class builder thing, because we're using the method to define exactly what we're doing. And so I want you guys to look, before I hit play, it was John Smith. Notice that whenever I do that, it keeps it in the same order. So one of the benefits of this is that you have the setters of the builder class that allow you to do it in any order that you want to without causing any kind of disruptions with it, because it's associated with a setter inside of the builder class. So the other benefit is that the driver record, all of these variables, all this data is still immutable. They were only able to be changed in the builder class, but now that we've called the builder class created the driver record class, the superclass that it belongs to. It created that, and at that point we have a full-on driver 2 record just like we had driver 1. Except we went from having this kind of cumbersome, imagine if this was all expanded out into like 50 parameters, how terrible that would be. Instead, maybe we just said, create a builder class to where all of these things are laid out like that, and you create a setter for everything in the builder class. Instead, and you don't even have to worry about the order. So basically, I could maybe I want to describe the height up here instead of down there, and notice that it won't really impact anything. I still get exactly the same thing as I had before. Almost identical to what it is identical to what I had before. So that's one of the benefits of a class utility. Sometimes we want the ability to have final values that cannot be mutated, but we also want to have the benefits of having a setter. So if we want both the ability to have a set and we want the ability to have if we want the ability to have a setter and we want the ability to have the variables marked final, a class builder pattern or a class builder utility is usually a great option. And the way that we do that is we typically, because we want to keep everything that's associated with the class together, this builder has no real benefit outside of the class. And so when we have this builder, we make it a subclass, but it has to be defined as static. Why does it have to be static? What do we say static was? Static is effectively where you utilize methods or subclasses or something about the class to where you don't have to create an instance of it. So this driver record builder class allows it to be used without ever creating an instance of driver record, which means that the variables up here never get set. The only time they get set is after all of these things, and you don't even have to call all of them. Also keep in mind that this is also a benefit. Let's suppose that you don't even want to set some of these things because you don't care and you hit play. Notice that it doesn't complain now because you're not using a constructor. You're using these methods as setters inside the builder class. So as you can see, that was kind of helpful. Don't know why you want to leave them out, but you never know. All right, notice that whenever you leave an integer blank, it defaults to this. Notice that whenever you leave a Boolean blank, it defaults to false. So that's one of the benefits of using this, is it shows you that first on. So let's just keep in mind, builder classes are what we use as a utility. They help us to use setters for variables that we want to be final. Now, once this class has been built, once we issue the build command right here, everything is final at that point. So it allows us to essentially set these any way I want to. Let's keep in mind, let's show something else here. Let's suppose I don't like that first name, then all of a sudden I want to update it to something else. I want to say maybe I'll call this Andrew. Now watch what happens to the file. It was initially set to John, but then it was updated to Andrew. So these class builders with these setters allow you to maybe do updates before you actually finalize anything. Who knows why that functionality may need to be there. There's a lot of use cases that we could dream up perhaps. But once the build has been, issued, once that has been sent out, this class gets constructed and then it's immutable with respect to the data in it at that point. And the only way that we could change anything then would be to destroy the class and then rebuild it with another builder. So the benefit is, let's keep in mind that we still are able to use the constructor exactly as we did before, except maybe there's people out there that need to use this. Maybe we have contractors, or maybe we have other people, or maybe they're using maybe they're allowing people to type this in from the command line as they go. So instead of having these intermediate variables that we had to set where we say, oh, we'll make the first name variables, last name variables, and then we pass them all into driver record after we've set them all, we could essentially call the builder class and set these incrementally in any order we want to, and they'll be arranged appropriately because we go over here, and whenever we call the builder class, we effectively arrange all these variables that have been set in the order that they need to be in. So let's make sure we understand it. All of these builder things are returning back the builder class. They're just updating as they go along. So when you update isOrganDonor, it returns this class with the organ donor updated. Then finally, what you do is when you recall the build method, it's returning the driver record class as we did just like we did here, except that it's using the variables from the builder class and then calls the constructor like this. And we have effectively the best of both worlds. We have the ability to use setters and have our variables set as final. All right, so hopefully this was useful. Sorry about the glitchiness that I'm experiencing here with my new Stream Deck. I thought I'd show that off a little bit. It is helpful to me. Still a little bit clumsy on using it, so I apologize for the pause that I had a second ago. I looked down and realized that yellow pause thing was blinking at me, so I apologize for that. Hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. Hopefully it was beneficial. Hopefully it gave you some exposure into new things about what it means to return this. That's kind of new perhaps. Maybe you hadn't seen it before. Maybe you haven't been exposed to creating a subclass yet. We kind of introduced this word called static, which means it's available without an instance of the class. Whatever. Okay, so with that said, I appreciate you watching. I hope this was beneficial. I hope you learned some cool things. And I will see you on the next lecture. Thank you.